Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Discography Discussion, where I take a deep dive into the studio albums of a certain artist, group, or band. And today is a very special episode because, one, we've hit a very good milestone of episode 5, and two, we're covering a group that I never thought I'd ever cover in my life Spice Girls. Very popular in the mid to late 90s, pretty much blowing up as soon as they started, with some really hit songs and songs that people still remember to this day, one in particular being Wannabe, their first ever single and literally their most famous song ever. And today we're going to take a look at the three albums that they produced, and while there are only three, they all do have a bit to talk about. So let's get started. The first album we're talking about is Spice from the Spice Girls. I should note before we continue that every one of these albums has a totally different album art to them, and sometimes they vary. And I tried to go for the ones that people probably recognize the most, but understand that they do have a lot of different ones. Like, for example, the Spice album has a ring as its alternate cover, which you can kind of see in the bottom right corner there. But it's like huge. But anyway, Spice came out in 1996, is only 39 minutes long, has a total of 10 tracks, and is more pop oriented than. Well, I mean, they were a pop group, and this is probably their most pop oriented. And honestly, it's my favorite. Um, and how do you start off an album with. Rather, how do you start off an album after throwing a single like Wannabe to the rest of the world and the world giving extreme amounts of positive reception? You start off the album with Wannabe. It's amazing. It just blows right in your face as soon as you hear it. You're like, oh, wow. Yeah, let's get started. And honestly, while Wannabe is a great song, there's a lot of other songs on here that are a lot better than Wannabe, to be honest. I feel like I've heard it a million times. Um, of course, through movies and other pop culture and stuff, Spice Girls were huge, and they lasted for a long time. After they were over and after the song even first came out, and uh, so I feel like Wannabe was kind of everywhere. A lot of movies, a lot of TV shows, and obviously MTV. But um, they have a lot of other really good songs on here. Um, and I don't know who the producer is for the album, but amazing. Or producers, there might be multiple, but they are amazing. Giving different sounds for every song, but still keeping in the genre of pop. Um, I don't know, just a really good album overall. There was nothing I really had too much of a problem with, other than one really big thing, which is kind of goes over their entire career, uh, and it's they talk about one thing and one thing only: love. A lot of love, a little too much love, to be honest. Yeah, a lot. Um, a lot of the album is just songs based on love or making love or something about love or relating to love or love, love, love. Yeah, the Big L word just followed the Spice Girls all the way through to the end, and my God, it's huge. Next album. Our next album is Spice World, which came out in 1997, which is 38 minutes long. Technically the shortest album, but I'm not really doing that here because all their albums are relatively short and same amount of tracks, so whatever. 10 tracks, and again, another pop oriented album. Uh, a pretty good album. Some problems here and there. Again, lyrically and just in theme, just sticking with love again, but overall, okay. There's some really good songs on here. Definitely a bit of a style change. Where the first one was a lot more pop and instrumental oriented, based on just sort of simplistic um, instruments and stuff. This one goes for a world vibe, introducing like more other country sort of instruments and percussions from something weird that I don't know the name of, but looks like a banjo or a tambourine, but it has some weird name probably, and I don't know it. But you can definitely hear it. And this also coincided with the release of their movie, also the name Spice World, and considered to be one of the worst movies of all time. Um, Virtually panned by everyone, but guess what? It made its money, and so did this album, and so did the Spice Girls. Uh, Now, this is definitely a real quick stopping point for the history of the Spice Girls to talk about how they were maybe pushing themselves a little thin everywhere by taking up every single brand deal that they could, trying to put themselves like literally everywhere, and kind of not trusting their main manager, um, and just kind of splitting with him, and that sort of being the downfall of all of them. And of all the Spice Girls, we've got Scary Spice, Sporty Spice, Baby Spice, Ginger Spice, and Posh Spice. Uh, yeah, I don't know which ones they are. I'm sorry, but if you can name them, hey, cool. You like the Spice Girls. But next album, and I know we're kind of moving through these albums relatively fast, but that's because the next album has a lot of history behind it. So let's get to it. Spice Girls Forever. Now, recognize anything? Anything different? Yeah, there's only 4 girls on the album. That's because Ginger Spice left, and now there's, there was 5, now there's only 4. Um, yeah, this album was a little hard to make. Now, this album came out in 2000, and it was 49 minutes long. That's definitely longer than the rest. And 11 tracks, and this one takes an extreme genre change. Where, like I said, the second one definitely had a difference in style and adding new instruments that maybe necessarily didn't need to be there. This one definitely changes drastically by taking that pop element and sort of just throwing it right out the window and going with an R&B style, which was pretty popular with the late 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, I guess technically just late 90s, but whatever. Um, so they were definitely going with a really big R&B style, and like I said, they had fired their manager at this point, and so a lot of things went really hectic. They were, still making songs all throughout the years between, and in '98 and '99, and even somewhat at the end of '97. Um, and they were releasing them singles here and there, but they never really got a full release until 2000, where they finally came back together after all of them being extremely busy and said, let's do this album. And they did, and it's okay. The main problem I have with this album is that it goes for too long. And that's not the fact that it's 49 minutes, it's that some songs are 5 minutes when they need to only be 3, maybe 4 at the most. Um, there's a song in particular at the end, I think it's the 7th track on the album, 7th or 8th, where it gets to about like the 3:40 minute mark, right? And the vocals sound like, oh yes, they end. And then it just kicks right back up for no reason and keeps going until the end of the full 5 minutes and something like 20 seconds. And it doesn't really feel good. And it's a really catchy song. I really liked it. But when you got to that point and it just kept going, you were like, why? And that kind of follows with a couple of other songs, in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, all the way through. And I get that they were trying to be a little more in touch with their emotions towards themselves and their fans, and that's why a lot of the songs were a lot longer. But at the end of the day, they didn't really need to be. It felt too long, and just it felt weird and not really like a Spice Girls album. Now, granted, I don't have a problem with the R&B style because it did sort of fit for them. Aside from the couple of parts where they tried to go and pay an homage to their first album and how they originally sounded, and then would go right back into the R&B style. But I don't have a necessarily big problem with it. I think it sounds absolutely fine. Like I said, though, the only thing is that the album just feels like it's a little too long at some points, and yeah. And this is essentially where the Spice Girls sort of ended. This is the last album that they were really collaborated on, and this is it. I Of all the album history that I've gone through so far, this is the weirdest one because Spice Girls have only had these 3 albums and a compilation album which came out in 2007, which was a very historic year, but we'll get to that later. Um, and it's so weird to see these just this huge like cultural phenomenon and just this gigantic explosion of like popularity gone within a couple of years. Only what 4 years? Man, it's amazing. The way I would like put it is like a supernova, like a star exploded and it looks beautiful, but then immediately it gets sucked back into itself and it's dying even worse than it was before. And it's awesome to look at, but when it's over, it's over. It's done, and that's kind of what it felt like. Uh, this felt relatively short and quick, and I was so surprised, um, especially when I got to the end of this album, which ends off with a song called "Goodbye," which was um, both a send off for their fans and a send off for Ginger Spice, who, like I said, had left. Um, and that was great. It felt great, but I don't know. It just sort of felt like maybe not an afterthought, but just sort of like there wasn't a whole lot of collective planning throughout the 3 years that it took to make this album. It sort of felt like we made a song in '98 and '99, and then we finished the rest of it in 2000 because we were like, how do we fit all these together? And that didn't feel too great coming from this album. And like the other two album covers, as you saw, both sort of stick within style of that like mid '90s style, of course, of just being like this very glittery, pretty much all white background album, not background of the album, I should say, and just like bright colors and whatever, and then this to just being sort of a very bold black and white, kind of minimalist here, and that definitely reflects the style of the album, and them as different from the rest of their albums and their other music. And that's really all I have to say about this part, this album, I should say. But let's move on because we do still have a little bit to talk about. The final thoughts. Well, technically, I have no problem with them, and I do understand they're a bit of a guilty pleasure for me and a lot of other people, and I do still really enjoy them. And like I said, while the first album may be my favorite, I can understand the style changes to the second and the third one. Granted, this third one being very drastic and kind of no real transition into it, although granted they had 3 years, so I guess it's enough of a transition, but whatever. Um, but this is one of those weird sort of this is one of those weird times where I don't necessarily care what they were before and what they became because I don't think changing um, to be like how they started would have done really anything. Like I said with my Linkin Park review, I think maybe if they had stuck with a tiny bit more of their original style and mixed it with their newer style, that they probably would have done a lot better with popularity and a lot of fans like me who were liking their older stuff better than their newer stuff. But here that doesn't really change my opinion or matter all the same. I think their older stuff was great, and while I said a drastic change into the R&B style with their third album was weird, I don't think going back to their original style would have helped. And in fact, it kind of hurts the album because there are a couple songs with parts in them that do kind of go back to the original style, and you can definitely tell it feels very weird and just kind of off and not right. But the thing that I wanted to talk about here was the year 2007, which is now 11 years ago. Jesus. Um, all of them, all of the original Spice Girls, all five of them, not four of them, had reunited in 2007, and they were going on another world tour, and they sold out within seconds of just putting the ticket page up, and they went worldwide again, just showing how much of a cultural phenomenon they were, and how much that it may have affected in the '90s, in the mid '90s, mid to late '90s, that even 10 years later it was still just as big, and they were still just as big. People were still remembering them, and it was great. Um, and everyone was excited because oh my god, another Spice Girls album, and they did actually have some things planned in 2016, 2 years ago, until I believe it was Ginger Spice who had gotten pregnant, and they sort of canceled all those plans. Yeah. So while I would have loved to been like, oh, the final thoughts wrong, let's go to the 2016 album, sadly that's not gonna happen because we probably won't ever get that album. Or maybe this year we'll see something, but the chances are very slim. But hey, it's a Spice Girls. What are you gonna do, right? Well, look, I know it was a relatively short episode, but I had a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun in other ways that I won't get into. But Spice Girls, guilty pleasure, funny, fun. really good artists. Not that bad. Yeah, that's all I really have to say. So, thank you for watching. Give a thumbs up if you like the video. Give a thumbs down if you did not like the video. If you think there's something I could change or do better, go ahead and tell me in the comments below. I'd love to read those. If there's an artist or a band or a group, oh, I said it wrong. It's artist, group, or band. But if you have any of those that you would like me to listen to, I'd also like to see those in the comments down below because I'd like to hear what you would like me to hear. Um, yeah, that about does it. Oh, and if you want to see more of these videos every other Sunday, go ahead and subscribe. I also will leave my Twitter down in the description below for any updates on the show. It'll always be pinned to the top or brand new episodes. So you don't have to follow, but if you really want to, go right ahead. Although, to be honest, I just mostly retweet a lot of things and don't really talk on there. But hey, whatever. Yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you in 2 weeks.